Hello friends, Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. And today I'm going to get started a fermented apple smoothie. So what I have here is some apples from our neighbor's tree. They get tons of apples every year no matter what happens, it seems, where our apple tree goes through phases. So last year we had apples galore, this year we had very few. We still got some really nice ones, but anyway, their apple tree they never prune it, they never do anything with it, and it's always putting out tons of apples. So anyway, far more than they can ever use, and they gave us a bunch. However, they were already starting to get kind of old. They have a nice flavor, are pretty sweet, but they kind of have that punky, soft, grainy texture to it that we don't really care for. And so I've been using them up in various ways, and one of the things obviously you will have seen in a more recent video is the one on the vinegar, the apple lime vinegar, and I'll make sure that I link to that video in the description box down below. Don't forget to click on either show more, or if you're on a smart device, that little gray triangle that you'll see right over here in the corner to open up the description box and find all the links and information we will be putting down below. So the other thing I've been doing with them is to make some apple smoothies. And I'll show you a picture of the last one I made right here. And initially what I had started off doing was just wanting to make an apple infused soda, but then decided once it was all done fermenting that I was going to go ahead and process it up. And so the ones I'm going to be making now, I've got two started here and I'm going to start a third one now, are going to be even better because they're going to be a little thicker and have more apple in them. What I'm doing here is you can do with any fruit that you want. I've made all kinds of fermented fruit smoothies, and I have an old video that's at least 3 years old. However, this one I'm doing a little bit differently because of the fruit that I'm using. So this is going to be the best way to do it when you're talking about a more dense fruit like your apples, pears, and so on. But you can still follow these same steps with whatever fruit you want to use. So right here what I have are one of my fermentation starters. Now you can actually do this without a fermentation starter. However, a fermentation starter is super easy to make. I started making these years ago and I use them for everything. I use them for making my homemade meads and wines. I use them for fermenting kimchi, vegetables, fruits, even eggs, hard-boiled eggs that is. So if you're interested in how I make these and the various ways that I use them, I will link down below to my very in-depth video I did on these. Even though I have several, I like to use my fermentation starter. It only takes 3 days to get it going. And again, super easy to make with whatever fruit or herbs you have on hand. And to me, it's just a way I can ensure I'm going to get a good ferment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to chop up some of these apples, skin, seeds, and all. The only thing I'm going to remove are the stems, and I'm going to fill up my jar right here. Okay, so I have my jar filled up. That only took 2 apples because one of those was pretty big, and then one of the smaller ones, and so I kind of packed it in there a little bit tight. Now, if you choose to remove your seeds and other parts, that's totally up to you. The only thing I like to remove are the stems, and I want to get them out now rather than later because I might forget them later. The apple seeds are not going to hurt you. You can leave them in there or not. Again, a matter of choice, but they're totally safe, especially when being consumed with the entire apple. They're not going to hurt you. And if you're interested, I will link to the video I did down below about eating peach kernels. Same applies to the apple seeds. Though this next step is totally unnecessary, I like to do this because it's also going to make it just all the more fizzy and give it plenty of sugars to feed on. Now, a lot of times I like to use just organic cane sugar because it's a lot less expensive than honey, but because I want the benefits of the raw honey as well as the flavor, I'm going to be adding some of the raw blackberry honey. One of my very favorites is a very creamy and rich honey with just a wonderful flavor. So whatever sugar, if you decide to use it, you can start with about 2 tablespoons and go up to 1/4 cup for your quart jar. And what that's going to do is just give the microbes in there more to feed on to make a more fizzy drink when it comes due. But remember, there's going to be a lot of sugar in the fruit as well. And then the other thing is once it works through a lot of that sugars, it's nice to have a little bit of sweetness left, because if you rely on just the sugar in the fruit, by the time it's done, especially when you're talking apples, it's not going to have a whole lot of sweetness at all to it. And I still like to have a little bit of sweetness, but it's, again, entirely up to you and whether or not you can even have some added sugars. If you're keto, you might want to just leave that out and then let the fermentation process just work out the sugars that are in the fruit. So I'm going to start with a couple of tablespoons. I probably should have done this, put this in first, but I didn't want it sitting at the bottom. And I'm not concerned about it being fully dissolved, whether it be the sugar or the honey, because during the fermentation process, your honey and your sugar will just naturally start to dissolve in there as the bacteria and the yeast works through them. So don't worry yourself too much about it. However, I probably should have put in half the apples, then the honey, and then topped it off with apples. So what I'm going to do is work that down in there so that I can pour my liquids in there. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a quarter cup at least. I always think whenever you're talking your fermentation starter, I'm going to shake it up a little bit here. You can see it's very fizzy. All right. Always use at least a quarter cup per quart jar of whatever it is you're making. When I'm making my mead, I always use at least a cup. You can always use more. It's not going to hurt anything to use more, but it's best to use at least that minimum amount. So I'm going to actually put in a whole half cup because that's what I poured and I'm not that concerned about it. And then I put my fruit back in there. And again, if you go watch that video, you can learn more about how I do this. You can use honey, you can use sugar. I always use cane sugar in this just because, like I said, it's cheaper. But your fermentation starters do need to be fed. Oh, I'm just going to top this one off with some water here. And then shake it up a little bit to work those sugars through. And then I will leave that out for the rest of the day before I put it back in the refrigerator. For the rest of this, I'm just going to top it off with some, I got my filtered rainwater here. Whatever water you have is going to be good. It's just most beneficial for your ferments that you try to stay away from anything that has chlorine in it. And it's best to avoid your fluoridated water anyway if your city's still fluoridating. But the fluoride isn't going to affect your ferment. It's the chlorine in the water that will. The nice thing about that is you can actually remove the chloramine and the chlorine easily enough. And I have a video on that I'll put down below. If you don't have a good source of clean water like well water, rainwater like we do, then yes, you can still use your tap water. There's just consider making sure it's dechlorinated before you use it. And that's what I did for years before we started collecting our own rainwater. Okay, now I'm going to use my chopstick again and kind of work that in there. Since I put that honey on top, normally this isn't that big a deal. I just want to make sure I work out any air pockets that might be in there. And I can always add more water later. So the next thing you're going to want to do with this kind of ferment is you want a tight fitting lid. And I prefer to use the plastic lids like these. These are my favorites now, these ball ones. They're supposed to be black, but they're actually charcoal gray. Even though they claim to be leak proof, they are more leak proof than the white ones, but they're not entirely leak proof. So I found putting in these little silicone inserts, you can find them on Amazon, and they're pretty inexpensive. And you can put these inside any lid, even a craft lid like this, anything that you want to make more leak proof, and that works pretty good. And I really like to do that because I tend to like to shake or rock my ferments like this when I first get them going, and then sometimes again later. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take this and you're just going to set it on your counter. Notice I have a folded up kitchen towel sitting there. Sometimes I'll put dishes under there, but since I've got a lot of different ferments going on at the same time, I just decided to fold up the towel and stick it there instead of having a bunch of dishes, or it would take up even more space. But having it sitting inside a bowl or whatever will also help if it does end up bubbling over and catch any of the liquids so they're not getting out all over your counter. Now I've got 3 different ones going here, and then what I'm going to do is let this sit for at least 3 days and ferment. And then what you need to do, so this is my little fruit fly trap. I always make traps. I have a video on that too, I'll link to down below. So what I like to do, what you want to do with these is you want to make sure that at least once a day you open it up or just burp it. I like to open it up and kind of push the fruit down in there a little bit, put the lid back on tightly. Do that at least once a day for the next 3 days. And once it gets very fizzy, which should be 3 to 4 days, then you're ready to move on to the next step. I'm gonna finish out the second half of this video in a few days, and then I'll be talking about what I'm gonna be doing with these homemade flavored extracts and a few other things. So I'll cover all that in the next half. Okay, well, it's been at least 3 days. It might have been 4. I think I lost count. But these are very fizzy. I'm going to start with these 2 because these are the first 2 I did. So these are at least already 4 days old. This lid is domed up, so this is going to be messy. This is the one more so than this one that keeps wanting to bubble over on me. And I've got those silicone rings in there, so even with me burping it every day, it's still been rather messy. So I'm going to very carefully try to open this. So what I like to do is just turn it a little bit. I hear it make that sound. And just let the air kind of slowly escape. Then I'll turn it a little bit more, and I'll keep doing that. Let me turn it one more time. Just a little bit. Okay, there we go. So I'm pushing that fruit down in there. It's very fizzy. Lots of bubbles going on there. And so all I'm going to do is take this whole jar and just dump it into my blender like so. Seeds and all. Remember, if you want to, you can remove the seeds, you can core your apples, whatever you want to do. But if you don't want that stuff in your smoothie, take all that stuff out before you start fermenting, because it's going to be a lot harder to do once you get to this point. I just like to leave it all in because there's lots of good nutrients in the skin and in those cores, and especially in those seeds. And then if you want to add a little flavor, the first one I made, I didn't add any flavor to it. So this one I'm going to go ahead and put in a little bit, let's say about maybe close to a tablespoon of cinnamon and about a teaspoon of cloves. And then you can also add some ginger to that or anything else that you think sounds really good. And put that lid on, and then all you got to do is process it right up. Now it does process very quickly because the thing with the apples when you're doing it this way to make your fermented smoothie is that the apples soften a lot. You can tell the difference just between these 2 started a day apart. You can tell these ones are much softer. These ones here should look pretty much like this by tomorrow. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that one for 1 more day. Boy, that smells good. Oh my goodness. I'm just going to pour it back in the same jar. So now that is ready to go as is. And again, if you were relying only on your apples or whatever for the ferment, or you're adding the sugars and letting them ferment completely out so there's no sweetness left, then what you can do if you want to add that sweetness, consider adding stevia or your monk fruit sweetener or anything like that. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to rinse this out, and then I'm going to do this other one, and I'm going to show you what I do with that one. Okay, there we go. I'm going to add some homemade orange extract. So I'm going to put about a tablespoon of that in, and some homemade vanilla extract. And then when I do my third one, I'm going to try adding some cherry and maybe vanilla to that one too. So I think a cherry vanilla apple smoothie will be pretty tasty. Okay, so let's pour that right back in there. It's such an easy process. Oh, that smells really good too. It smells like orange cream is what it makes you think of. All right, so let me pour myself a little bit of this one, and we'll give it a taste. Gosh, it smells good. Oh, Yes, very, very good. It almost reminds me a little bit of an orange Julius, except for it's mostly apples with the homemade orange and vanilla extracts added to it. So very, very good. This is so exciting. You can tell I'm having a good time here. So now let me get another glass and try the cinnamon. Just trying a little bit. Oh, yes, quite tasty. So definitely just perfect for the fall. These flavors right here, yum. In fact, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and make up that other one so I can get the cherry one going too. So I'm going to go ahead and add a tablespoon of the cherry extract and about a tablespoon of the vanilla. So this is the great thing about making your own homemade extracts. And if you're interested in learning how to do it, then I'll go ahead and link to the video down below about all about extracts. And I also lead back to some of the various different videos I have, because I have some where you can make alcohol-free versions, you can make a lower alcohol version. Now sadly it didn't add as much color as I hoped it would, but still it should be good. Here's another option too, is if you want to make it more colored, you can add a little bit of your beet kvass to that, or even your beet powder. I don't think that's going to change the flavor, and let's try it like this, and then maybe I'll try adding just a little bit of beet kvass and see what it does to the color. Oh, also very good. I think I have a hard time figuring out which one of these is my favorite. Okay, so let's start by putting in just to this glass right here. Let's put in just a little bit. Still very good. It doesn't, I can't taste the beets. So I can add the beet kvass to get some color in there just to make it more interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in about a 1/4 cup of beet kvass into this whole thing. Actually, let me start with less than a 1/4 cup because I don't want it too strong. Let's mix that in there. Oh, there we go. Oh, beautiful color. Look at that. And yes, I'm glad I didn't go more than the 1/8 cup because that would have been too much. All right, and there you go. So now with that little bit of beet kvass in there, not only does it add a little more color to make it easier to tell these three apart, but it's just adding a little bit more nutritional benefit in there as well. All right, now remember, this is just apple smoothies. I'm just showing you this one because we had all those apples, but you can do this same thing with any fruit. Flavor it however you want. Think about if you're really looking for adding more health benefits to it, think about adding things like turmeric. Turmeric is a good thing to add for getting those benefits. It just blends well with things that are either sweet or savory. That's what's great about turmeric, as well as ginger. Ginger's the same thing. It can go good with something that's savory as well as something that is sweet. So I've made smoothies before using ginger in it, and those were not fermented ones, but those were ones that I froze in the summertime where we're trying to get a lot of cool treats. So like I think it was a ginger plum or something like that. But then you've got your fermented treats. You could do all of the above. You could ferment it and then freeze it and still get those good probiotics because the freezing process isn't going to kill that. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed this video and it helps encourage you to get creative. It's such an easy thing to do. It only takes 3 days to get a nice ferment, and 4 if you want to leave it longer and let it eat through more of those sugars. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. Take care and God bless.